Hello. So, as we are now halfway through 2026, because apparently the halfway point of 2026 is July 2nd. So, I guess I was just lying in my past videos where I was like, it's the halfway point of the year. It's not. We are now officially at the halfway point of the year, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted to share something that I feel incredibly proud of. So, I've mentioned in the past that I don't typically read nonfiction in my leisure time. I do have to read it for school, but I don't count those books because I have to read them if I want to do well and pass. But this year, I have managed so far to read not just one, but two nonfiction books. And I feel really proud of myself, but I also know that I should do better at reading nonfiction books. So today, what I was thinking is kind of just briefly talking about the two books that I read and sort of making a nonfiction TBR for the rest of 2026. I don't know if I'm biting off more than I can chew. I didn't necessarily plan to read these two books this year. It just kind of happened that I wanted to read them this year. So I don't know if I'm like biting off more than I could chew or just making it too big of a goal for myself. But because I just feel really proud that I read two nonfiction books, I kind of just want to keep the ball rolling because I do want to read nonfiction books. I don't know what kind of motivation I need. And I feel like because I read the two, I feel like that's what I'm going to need in order to continue reading nonfiction books. So honestly, just to get started with the two nonfiction reads that I had this year. The first one is Black Punk Now, edited by James Spooner and Chris L. Terry. I've mentioned this book before. It has a mix of comics, short essays, fiction stories, as well as nonfiction. So I know like every single book ever is going to fall under multiple genres. And because there are nonfiction essays in here, I'm counting it as one of my nonfiction reads. This was a really fun book. I really enjoyed the comics, and I also really loved reading people's different fictional stories that were in here. And I also really loved reading more about people's like personal connection when it comes to getting into the punk scene. So, with this second nonfiction book that I read, I actually had to double check the dates. So, I started it on May 17th and I slowly read it for quite some time until I finished it on July 2nd. So I think it's pretty cool that I read my second nonfiction book and I finished it right at the midpoint of 2026. And that book is Scream With Me: Horror Films and the Rise of American Feminism, 1968 to 1980 by Eleanor Johnson. So this book obviously is like horror, feminism, film critique, cultural studies, what have you. And I absolutely loved it. I finished tabbing all of these quotes today. Some pages have one, some pages have like three of these tabs. I learned a lot in this book. I learned quite a lot. And I mentioned this, I haven't seen every single movie mentioned in here, and I haven't read every single book mentioned in here. I have not seen nor read Rosemary's Baby. I've seen The Exorcist. I haven't read it. I've read The Shining and I have seen The Shining. I love the movie The Omen. I actually can't remember right now if it's a book. If it is, I definitely haven't read it. And I don't believe it's a book, but I have not seen the movie Alien. And there's also a lot of other movies mentioned in here. There's a few movies that are like from more recent years that I haven't seen yet. But just to try and get back to this, I loved this book. I learned so much. I enjoyed reading it so much. And even though I read it for a very long time, almost 2 months, I'm glad that I did because I feel like I was able to better absorb a lot of the information in here. And today, when I was tabbing all of these quotes, I was like skimming them as I was tabbing them. And I remember how I felt when I first read those quotes. And I just kind of, I feel like going back to it really helps reinforce everything that I learned. And it kind of motivates me to try and research a little bit more about some of the different laws that are mentioned in here, the different incidences, and to definitely read a lot of the books that are mentioned in here that were later turned into movies. So again, I don't want to ramble because I can feel myself wanting to ramble. I loved this book so much. I learned a lot and I am incredibly happy that I read it this year and that it's my second nonfiction book of 2026. Now, when it comes to my nonfiction TBR, I don't know when I want to read them. I don't know if feel pressure is the right word because I should read nonfiction books and I should probably put a little bit more like of a challenge on myself to read nonfiction books. but I read Black Punk Now and Scream with Me because I just saw them and I wanted to read them. So I don't know if I should assign a month to the 4 books that I have. I also don't want it to be that I just go by every day and every month and I'm like, no, I don't want to read it yet. I'll read it later. And then later turns into 2027 and I only have the 2 nonfiction books under my belt. So I do have the 4 that I want as like a TBR. I just don't know when I'll read them. However, they are pretty short that I feel like I could definitely finish at least 2 before 2026 ends. So I guess we'll see if that happens, but I will just get started on talking about the 4 books on my potential nonfiction TBR. So the first one that I have, I don't know if I'm like cheating a little bit because I technically did read this book. I bought this, I think, for a class back in 2020, maybe, if not late 2019, early. Actually, no, it was definitely between late 2019 or in 2020 for a class that I was taking. So I did read it, but because it's been literally the 6 years since I read this book, I have no idea what I read. I did flip through the book and I do have like my notes in this textbook because I would highlight and underline things and write like notes to myself on the margins and stuff. But I really don't know what I wrote down. I don't know what I read because I don't remember because it was already 6 years ago. And the first book that I have is How Race is Made in America: Immigration, Citizenship, and the Historical Power of Racial Scripts by Natalia Molina. I don't remember the class that I read this for either, but it is a pretty short book. It doesn't look like it, but at the very end, there is like the index, the bibliography, as well as the notes. So, without those 3 sections, this book is 152 pages. I feel like I could definitely read 152 pages because Black Punk Now, I feel like was in the 350 page mark. I can't remember. Well, I guess if I check, I could give the exact number. This was under about 340 pages. So I feel like 152 is definitely something that I can do within a month. So I'll read the back of what it's about. It looks really long, but it's not. It's just like the first 2 paragraphs. How Race is Made in America examines Mexican Americans from 1924, when American law drastically reduced immigration into the United States, to 1965, when many quotas were abolished, to understand how broad themes of race and citizenship are constructed. These years shaped the emergence of what Natalia Molina describes as an immigration regime, which defined the racial categories that continue to influence perceptions in the United States about Mexican Americans, race, and ethnicity. Molina demonstrates that despite the multiplicity of influences that help shape our concept of race, common themes prevail. Examining legal, political, social, and cultural sources related to immigration, she advances the theory that our understanding of race is socially constructed in relational ways, that is, in correspondence to other groups. Molina introduces and explains her central theory, racial scripts, which highlights the ways in which the lives of racialized groups are linked across time and space and thereby affect one another. How Race is Made in America also shows that these racial scripts are easily adopted and adapted to apply to different racial groups. As I flip through the pages, I'm looking at the notes I wrote for myself, and I still cannot tell you what I remember, if anything. And sometimes some of my notes are vague, but I highlighted this and I wrote in this pretty much on every single page. And I guess I bought this used because there's writing in here that is definitely not mine. So it's going to be really interesting to read this book again and see if anything kind of rings a bell from when I first read this back in 2020 or so. With this next book on my TBR, I think I got this from somebody, but I can't remember exactly. I just look at it and every time I see it, I'm like, where did I get that from? Because it just feels kind of random on my shelves. But the next book is Fatland: How Americans Became the Fattest People in the World by Greg Kritzer. I think the only book that I read that talked about like health and food and things like that and paying for food, actually, it's called $2 a Day. I just can't remember the 2 authors because there was 2. And I feel like I read this back in 2022, 2023, one of those years. I know I read it around the same time that I read Danny Trejo's book, but I know the first book that I read that dealt with like food, nutrition, things like that is called $2 a day. But I think that one was more about how food is just really expensive, if I'm remembering correctly, because it's been a few years. But Fatland is one that I have on my shelves, and I will also read the back. It's pretty short. In this astonishing expose, the journalist Greg Kritzer looks beyond the sensational headlines to reveal why nearly 60% of Americans are now overweight. Kritzer's sharp eyed reportage and sharp tongued analysis makes for a disarmingly funny and truly alarming book. Kritzer investigates the many factors of American life, from supersize to Super Mario, from high fructose corn syrup to the high cost of physical education in schools, that have converged and conspired to make us some of the fattest people on the planet. He also explains why pediatricians are treating conditions rarely before noticed in children, why type 2 diabetes is on the rise, and how agribusiness has unwittingly altered the American diet. So I don't know what this author will say about like Super Size Me. I'm assuming it's Super Size Me, like that man who ate McDonald's every day. But I thought he like lied about the results or something. Maybe that's what this author is going to touch on. I don't know. So I guess I'll see. Also, this book is pretty old. This is from 2003. So this is 23 years old. So it's going to be really interesting to read a book that was written during that year. I still think it'll be pretty interesting. And this is also a pretty short book, minus the index and the notes in the back. This book totals 184 pages. Also, the very last page on here is the body mass index thing, which I could have sworn that was like racist, if I'm not wrong. I might be wrong because I don't know anything about health or weight or food or anything like that. And I don't know if maybe the author is going to say like this is wrong, it's not accurate or whatever, but I'm pretty sure the BMI thing is like super racist. But I won't know until I read it, and who knows when I will, but considering the first book and the second book are pretty close together in terms of page count, I feel like I could also get through this book in 2026. So I guess we'll see. I do want to note that with these last two books that I'm going to talk about, I did not buy these. I was gifted them when I worked in book publishing once upon a time. On my first day or week or something, a few of like my, I guess, coworkers, I was the intern, but like the people that I was working under, whatever that word is, they were really nice and welcoming. And they sent me some of their favorite books from the imprint that we were working on. The second to last book that I have is called Dress Code: Unlocking Fashion from the New Look to Millennial Pink by Veronique Hyland. And as you can see, this is the uncorrected proof that I have because again, it was sent to me. And to read the back, why does fashion hold so much power over us? Most of us care about how we dress and how we present ourselves. Style offers clues about everything from class to which in group we belong to. Dress code takes aim at the institutions within the fashion industry while reminding us of the importance of dress and what it means for self presentation. Everything from societal changes to the progress or lack thereof of women's rights to the hidden motivations behind what we choose to wear to align ourselves with a particular social group can be tracked through clothing. Veronique Hyland examines many thought provoking questions. Why has the French girl persisted as our most enduring archetype? What does dressing for yourself really mean for a woman? How should a female politician dress? Will gender differentiated fashion go forever out of style? How has social media affected and warped our sense of self presentation and how we are styling ourselves expressly for it? Not everyone participates in painting, literature, or film, but there is no opting out of fashion. And yet, fashion is still seen as superficial and trivial, and only the finest of couture is considered art. Hyland argues that fashion is a key that unlocks questions of power, sexuality, and class, taps into history, and sends signals to the world around us. Clothes mean something, even if you're just wearing jeans and a t shirt. So this sounds really interesting because I don't read anything also about fashion. The only like fashion related nonfiction or fashion related fiction books I read were like The Devil Wears Prada and Cover Story, and I can't think of anything else. And I guess these are also really good questions because I don't really think about these enough, I think. I do think about what dressing for myself means. I don't know if the French girl thing is like the white t-shirt, the baggy blue jeans, and like flats with dark sunglasses and stuff. I don't know. I see that topic like all over YouTube with commentary channels about like the French girl or the it girl or something in New York City. And I don't know. I don't know if that's what that's referencing or not, but it sounds really cool. I'm excited to learn more about fashion and to think deeper about the questions that Veronique Highland is asking. The very last book on my nonfiction TBR is called Patriarchy Blues Reflections on Manhood by Frederick Joseph. And to also read the back for this one, what does it mean to be a man today? How does the pervasive yet elusive idea of masculine toxicity actually reflect men's experiences, particularly those of color, and how they navigate the world? In this thought provoking collection of essays, poems, and short reflections, Frederick Joseph contemplates these questions and more as he explores issues of masculinity and patriarchy from both a personal and cultural standpoint. From fatherhood and manning up to abuse and therapy, he fearlessly and thoughtfully tackles the complex realities of men's lives today and their significance for society, lending his insights as a Black man. Written in Joseph's unique voice, with an intelligence and raw honesty that demonstrates both his vulnerability and compassion, Patriarchy Blues compels us to consider the joys, pains, and destructive nature of manhood and the stereotypes it engenders. So I actually didn't realize that this was a collection of essays, poems, and short reflections. I know that I read the back of these books when I received them, but it's been so many years because this was released in May 2022. So yeah, so I'm really excited still to read these. I'm really interested because it talks about or the line that says from fatherhood and manning up to abuse and therapy. He fearlessly and thoughtfully tackles the complex realities of men's lives today and their significance for society, lending his insights as a Black man. So I think this is going to be really interesting, and I'm really excited to see what this book also has in store. And I am really excited because all of the four books that I chose are purposefully completely different topics. And I think maybe that's what I need to do to like feel motivated to read more nonfiction books because Black Punk Now and Scream With Me, I'm sure there's a lot of like similarities and overlap in some areas, but at a glance, they are pretty different. So I feel like this is going to be really interesting to have as my nonfiction TBR with the four books that I talked about. I'm really excited to revisit all of these at the end of 2026. I am really hoping that I could at least get through two of these. I don't even care which two. I just want to get through two more nonfiction books. So at the very least, I can say I have read four nonfiction books in 2026 because in previous years it was like zero or one, maybe. So hopefully 2026, I can read more nonfiction books. So that is all that I had for myself today. I would love to know if you've read any of the nonfiction books that I talked about. I would love to have someone to talk about these books with. I write down my thoughts in a journal, but I feel like sometimes with nonfiction, it's just more beneficial to have someone to talk to so you can bounce around the different like thoughts and opinions that you have. So if you've read any of these, please let me know. If you haven't read any of these, which one would you pick up? Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that I see you next time.